Thanks for joining me for another week of Bayfair Kids Online. So guys, last week, if you watched our video, you would know that we started a brand new series in a book in the Old Testament. Now, if you know what book we started last week, I want you to shout it out right now. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to shout the name of the book that we started last week. Ready? Did you get it? Jonah. Jonah is the book that we're in. It's in the Old Testament, and it's following a prophet named, you guessed it, Jonah. So Jonah is this guy that God told to go to a certain place called Nineveh, and he ended up trying to go to an entirely different place the completely opposite way called Tarshish. And so something not so great happened to him. And what happened was he was swallowed by a giant fish. Oh my goodness. And so that's where our story ended last week, with Jonah being swallowed by a great big fish. A crazy place to end, because what happens to Jonah? We are going to find out today, like right now. You guys get to find out the next part of the story. Do you remember what our main point from last week was? It's 3 words. Remember? Follow God's directions. Do you remember that? Follow God's directions. That's what we learned last week. We learned that it didn't go so well when Jonah tried to do his own thing and go his own way instead of going where God wanted him to go and doing what God wanted him to do. We're going to keep reading this story today, and we'll talk about what happens when we don't follow God's directions. When we disobey God, there are consequences. Like everything in life, we have to deal with what happens because of the decisions that we make. If you touch a hot stove, you get burned. If you stuff a Barbie down the toilet, well, it's gonna overflow and make a big mess of toilet water all over the floor. The choices that you make usually affect more than you think they will. There are things that have to be dealt with after you make those decisions. But how do we make sure that we obey God? How can we make sure that we're doing what He wants us to do? Well, we need to line up our hearts with God's heart. That sounds like a really simple solution, but when we actually have to do it, it's a lot harder than it sounds. Today in our passage, Jonah is facing the consequences of his actions. He made some bad choices to go against the directions God gave him, and now he has to deal with that. Let's read Jonah chapter 2 to find out what happens. We are at the part of the episode where I get to remind you of our memory verse from last week. We are doing a memory verse for the whole month. You have 4 whole weeks to memorize this one verse. Do you think you can do that? Can you manage that? So I want to make sure that you are getting scripture hidden in your heart so that when you go through things in life, you can remember God's truth. And so I think it's so important for us to spend more than 1 week learning verses, because it's really hard if we learned one every week of the year, because that would be 52 verses a year. That's a lot. And so the verse that we learned last week that I want you guys to do again with me this week is found in the book of Philippians. It's Philippians 4, verse 13. It goes like this: I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Ready? I'm going to say it again. Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Okay, so now that we're reminded of the verse, do you remember it now? Okay, I hope it sounds familiar. If you were here last week, I'm hoping that you'll be able to remember it from last week and learn some more this week. Hopefully we help you with this little song that we're about to do, so that next week you'll really, really, really know it. And then 2 weeks from now, you'll super, super duper know it. Okay? So we are going to do a little bit of a song. Okay, are you ready? It goes like this. Can you do like a beat like this? Clap your hands like this. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Philippians 4:13. Philippians 4:13. Okay, is that easy enough? Do you think you got it? This time you guys can do it along with me. First we gotta get the claps going. Ready? Think you can do it? Here we go. Do it with me. So we're going to do it 3 times, and then we're going to say where it's found. So Philippians 4:13, we're going to say that twice, okay? I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. One more time. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Philippians 4:13. Philippians 4:13. All right. How did you do? Did you do good? Do you think you got it? Okay, I hope that song helps you to remember our verse for this month. But next week, I'll be back with another way to help you get it stuck in your brain. All right. Bye. Then they cried out to the Lord, Jonah's God. "O Lord," they pleaded, "don't make us die for this man's sin, and don't hold us responsible for his death. O Lord, you have sent this storm upon him for your own good reasons." Then the sailors picked up Jonah and threw him into the raging sea, and the storm stopped at once. The sailors were awestruck by the Lord's great power, and they offered him a sacrifice and vowed to serve him. Now the Lord had arranged for a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from inside the fish. He said, "I cried out to the Lord in my great trouble, and he answered me. I called to you from the land of the dead, and Lord, you heard me. You threw me into the ocean depths, and I sank down to the heart of the sea. The mighty waters engulfed me. I was buried beneath your wild and stormy waves. Then I said, O Lord, you have driven me from your presence, yet I will look once more toward your holy temple. I sank beneath the waves, and the waters closed over me. Seaweed wrapped itself around my head. I sank down to the very roots of the mountains. I was imprisoned in the earth, whose gates lock shut forever. But you, O Lord my God, snatched me from the jaws of death. As my life was slipping away, I remembered the Lord, and my earnest prayer went out to you in your holy temple. Those who worship false gods turn their backs on all the Lord's mercies. But I will offer sacrifices to you with songs of praise, and I will fulfill all my vows. For my salvation comes from the Lord alone." Then the Lord ordered the fish to spit Jonah out onto the beach. Okay, wow. So there's a lot going on there. So we see that Jonah is now inside the fish, and he is crying out to God, which is just another way for us to say he is telling God what's on his heart. He is praying to God and just having a conversation with God about all that's going on. Jonah is starting to see the consequences of the choices that he made, and his heart is starting to feel really sorry for what he's done. This whole chapter is a prayer and him having a conversation with God about all these thoughts that he's processing while he's in this fish. Guys, he is inside the stomach of a fish. Can you imagine that? That would be so gross, so crazy. And he was there for not 1 day, not 2 days, but 3 whole days. That's so wild. Guys, you know who else was somewhere for 3 whole days and was dead but came to life again? Jesus. Guys, this story is actually a prophetic story, which means that it tells us way back in the Old Testament about something that would happen in the New Testament. It's kind of a word we call foreshadowing. It's telling us about something that would happen in the future. What happened in the future, way years and years and years after Jonah lived, is that Jesus came to this earth. And Jesus, he was born to his mom, Mary, and his dad, Joseph, and he grew up. And when he was an adult, what happened was he died on the cross for us. And he was put in the grave for 3 days. He died, and it seemed like all hope was lost. But you know what happened? Is that he came back to life again. And so this story of Jonah shows us that same thing. God protected him, and even though he went in a fish where people normally never come back out of, God saved him. God had a plan, and God, 3 days later, brought him safely back to shore. And so this tells us about the hope that we have in Jesus, that God always has a plan, and that we can put our trust in Jesus because not even death could hold him down. Not even death could defeat Jesus. And so that is a really important thing for us to know about our story today. Something that maybe you missed that part. Maybe you didn't make that connection, but now you know how special of a story this is. Jonah definitely learned that when we disobey God, there are consequences. The situation would have been completely different if Jonah hadn't disobeyed God. See, when we make a decision, good or bad, other things are impacted by that. Everything that happens in life causes a reaction in some way. Just like Jonah had to deal with the consequences of the choices that he made to disobey God, there are consequences in your everyday life to the choices that you make. Whether you hurt someone's feelings by saying something mean, or you make someone smile by being kind, or giving them a compliment. See, those choices affect more than just that moment. Maybe the girl that you complimented was having a bad day, and your compliment gave her the confidence and helped her know that someone cares about her. Her entire day could have been changed by that one thing you said to her, and maybe her whole week could have been changed. But on the other side, when we hurt someone by saying something mean or rude, that could also result in their whole week being affected, but in a bad way. Maybe they spend their whole week being lonely and feeling like they don't matter because they keep being reminded of the way that you treated them and the words that you said to them. See, our actions affect the people around us, but Jonah shows us that our actions also affect our relationship with God. The decisions we saw Jonah make in the first chapter damaged his relationship with God. In the second chapter, we see how those choices landed Jonah with some big consequences. Whether we like it or not, everything we do affects our relationship with God. Either we grow closer to God and we learn to trust him more and follow the directions he gives us, or we get farther away from him by disobeying him. Like we said earlier, you need to line up your heart with God's heart in order to make sure you're following the directions he gives you. You can learn more about what God wants and what his heart is focused on by spending time with him through reading his word, which is the Bible, and talking to him through prayer. So something I want you guys to learn from today is that there are consequences when we disobey God. There are consequences every time we follow our own desires, our own heart, instead of following what God has asked of us. So can you guys remember that? When we disobey God, there are consequences. Follow God's directions, and when we disobey God, there are consequences. Those are two really important things for you to remember. I want you to keep them in your brain all week, because when you come back next week for video number 3, I want you guys to be able to shout those out and remind me what our points are from the last 2 weeks. Can you remember those 2 main points all week? You think you can do it? All right, I will see you back here next Sunday morning, guys. Have an awesome week. Bye.